Hello and welcome to episode 4 of Locomotive Spotlight, a series in which we shine a metaphorical spotlight on specific New Zealand locomotives. Examples include AB608 or the funny little steam outline diesel engine at the Taranaki Pioneer Village, or just whatever other unique engine I think of as long as I have enough footage of them. In this episode, we're going to focus on what I think I can comfortably say is my favourite diesel locomotive of all time. This is DC 4260. She was built by General Motors of Canada in 1967, originally as DA 1531. Between 1978 and 1983, 85 locomotives from the 146-strong DA class were rebuilt by Clyde Engineering in Australia or at NZR's own Hutt Workshops. In the case of 1531, she was rebuilt by Clyde Engineering and re-entered service in 1979. The reason, or rather reasons, why 4260 is my favourite diesel locomotive is because of many special memories I have with this engine, as well as the fact that she is the only DC that ever received the early KiwiRail livery. My interest in 4260 started when I saw an illustration of her in a book, but I don't remember the book's title. Incidentally, I never saw the real locomotive until after she lost the old fruit salad livery in favour of KiwiRail Phase 1, with the repaint taking place in 2008. Interestingly, there was a day in November 2010 when 4260 was helping DXB 5080 with sorting out the then new DL locomotives. 6 of them arrived on that day, including the class leader 9008. When I went on the Overlander down to Wellington in early 2012, the train was hauled by DC 4260. Incidentally, this wasn't too long before she was assigned to SA and SD commuter service in Auckland, where she stayed until the arrival of the AM electric units in 2014 and 2015. During that period, I did see her at least 3 times, one of which was on November 16th, 2014, when she was actually in the sidings at Pukekohe, all while the ADKs were doing their farewell excursion. The 4260 returned to freight service with KiwiRail in 2015, and she is still on the roster today, but from what I gather she's currently at Hutt Workshops. There was one day in May 2019 where I ended up going on a mad train chase from Huntly all the way to Pokeno for the sole purpose of getting a good picture of 4260 on the one day she actually ran train 228 on her own. More recently, in November 2019, I ended up seeing 4260 again, but this time it was on the L1 shunt in Whangarei. And as an aside, I'd like to give a shout out to Ricky Sameti, I hope I pronounced his name right, for his recent video on DC 4790 in the same city. Incidentally, 4260 was one of 3 DCs that were based in Whangarei throughout 2020. This was during the North Auckland Line upgrade project, and my parents were actually up that way while the work was still going on. And a couple of times in 2020 and 2021, I've been fortunate enough to catch 4260 again, but this time on the N52 shunt, otherwise known as the Hotapu/Waitoa shunt. And the last time I saw this locomotive was in March 2021. As with the previous LS episodes, we'll now look at some footage I've captured of 4260 over the years, as well as at least one clip from when she was in Whangarei. These clips are from the years 2010, 2012, 2019, 2020 and 2021. This footage was was captured in Tuako on April 29, 2010. The DFT has since been repainted in KiwiRail colours and is now DFB 7282. 'Passing the locomotive depot in Palmerston North on January 26, 2012. This was captured whilst I was on board the Overlander, and on that day DC 4260 was leading the charge. Three days later, we see the same DC speeding through Paikakariki with the southbound Overlander again. Jumping forward in time a little more than 7 years, we now see 4260 shunting in Whangarei on November 15, 2019. Later in the afternoon she would run long hood leading on the L1 shunt to Kauri and back. Then a few months later, in February 2020, I went over to Morrinsville to see her on the M52 shunt. This was a real spur-of-the-moment trip, as earlier in the day I remember getting very, very frustrated after going on a weird bus ride. Here's what happened. I was on a bus to Mount Maunganui via the Bayfair shopping centre, but when it got to Bayfair, the driver went off on a not-in-service run all the way over to Pies Pa, with me still on the bus. In other words, I thought the bus was going to continue on its hospital-linked service, but instead it went over to Pies Pa to run a Route 1 service. As stated previously, the last time I saw 4260 was on March 31st, 2021. On that day, I filmed her arriving at and departing from Hautapu on the M52 shunt. Thank you for watching the 4th episode of Locomotive Spotlight. If you like this series, please consider checking out the other episodes in my LS playlist. And stay tuned for the next episode, which will focus on steam locomotive Y542.